Welcome to Quips and Clips podcast. I'm Tanya D. Davis, here speaking with policymakers, policy influencers, and those who try to hold them accountable. This week, as the assault on diversity, equity, and inclusion made its way to the Library of Congress, I sat down with educator, licensed therapist, and expert in organizational development, Elizabeth Speck. She is the founder and principal of MindOpen Learning Strategies for Social Change in New York City. She has worked for years on inclusion and equity where diversity already exists. She joins me now. Let me start off with just the actual phrase that's on the homepage of your website. We create trauma-informed, anti-racist learning opportunities to help mission-driven organizations achieve social justice goals. So what does that mean to folks who are not in academia or psychology or, or who work in social justice? Essentially, what would that mean to the average Joe?
Yeah, well, a lot of human services and social services are not necessarily explicitly connecting this work to social justice outcomes. The reason for a lot of our service systems is root causes of structural inequality, structural oppression, and violence. And so we need to keep that North Star in mind, not in a way that is airy-fairy or jargony, but is practical. And so when we say trauma-informed, anti-racist approaches, it's not about checking a box. It is about, are the services or the mission that we are working on in our daily professional work leading to outcomes that will produce a fairer, safer society where all lives are valued and we're not playing the game of devaluing some or compromising on those ideals.
Okay. To dive a little further into that, is it accurate to say that you help social justice organizations or leaders, employees learn how best to respect each other's personal experiences and perspectives in order to get to like the same shared goal?
It's more accurate to say we work with nonprofit organizations, public sector departments within corporations like human resources or social responsibility initiatives that are in the work of helping others in some way. And so connecting that work to ultimate outcomes that make a fairer, safer, more just world where everyone can thrive.
Okay, so it's not like you take your business into Goldman Sachs or something.
I mean, I am a graduate of the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program, which I could talk more about multiple perspectives, perhaps in another conversation.
Another instance, sure. Okay.
But would I welcome an opportunity to kind of like tease out the kinds of social impact initiatives that a Goldman Sachs may be working on and really asking some of the challenging questions and just really looking on a granular level about when we say we're working towards equity and opportunity for people of marginalized identities, is it actually leading towards the society that we say we wish to see?
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So it is across the board. Tell me something. How does your work relate to the purpose and practice of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs?
Sure. The reason for many of the service programs that I might work in is because we are not leveraging diversity, we are not living equity, and inclusion is kind of a fuzzy concept, right? There are some nice catchphrases about inclusion as being asked to the dance or something like that, but um, it's not it's not cute, and not everybody wants to be included in every way in the workplace. It is really about, do you have an opportunity to be safe, to see yourself represented in a way that lets you know that you're not blocked or privileged on a path to opportunities because of how you're perceived. I forget what your question is because I'm going off.
Well, just essentially how I know that we've talked in the past, and I've often referred to what you do as working in DEI, and you have corrected me, but it is related. So I'm trying to get to the heart of how what you do is related to DEI programs.
Right. Uh, we don't need the initials. Is the work about working towards representative diversity and diversity of thought, perspectives, experience, so that we can do better work? Yes. Is it about really having an accurate understanding of history and where there has not been equality or equity, so that we can, on multiple levels, on the individual, on the organizational, and on the systemic level, um, ensure that policies and practices are equitable? Yes.
Okay,
And then,
gotcha.
right, inclusion, and there's also so much now to unpack around psychological safety. There are some colleagues, I'll give a link to their research because I'm not recalling their name right now, who are putting forward an idea of psychological agency, not psychological safety, because for many people who belong to groups that are marginalized, safety is not realistic, or it can feel like gaslighting. But what does psychological agency mean in the workplace, where you are able to make choices without having to consider life, death, or livelihood consequences?
Right. Okay. Well, right now we are, of course, all of us living in this era of DEI trying to be eradicated from everything, from the government, from and even, the government trying to have a hand in eradicating it from the private sector as well. Um, to play devil's advocate, because of course, as a Black woman, I can certainly appreciate efforts towards inclusion and equity, et cetera, and diversity. But as I'm listening to you talk about what you do and why you do it, I wonder if it isn't, if there isn't kind of a feeding of the whole idea of this is touchy feely and caring about people's feelings, and what does that have to do with doing your job? Like, how do you address that perception?
Yeah, absolutely. At the core of this work is also racial literacy, which we need in the United States because our society has been built on ideas of race, and race, of course, is an idea that has been used to um, put people into hierarchies um, of worth. And so that means all of us need to get more comfortable with the discomfort of locating ourselves. Like, so for me, we have lots of conversations. I am um, a white, racialized, I have ethnicities, but I experience the life of a white person here in the United States. I'm a third generation American, from a middle class professional background, and that has afforded me all kinds of opportunity and passes in terms of what some of the struggles or mistakes I may have had in the past have not affected my ability um, to earn or to live a life in relative safety with myself and my family. And so these are not touchy-feely issues. These are understanding that when there are dynamics that impact how you move about the world and whether you're able to relax in the world or whether you are in a mode of survival, whether it's conscious or unconscious, but whether there's existential threat attached to your body or your being, um, that really has an impact in how we're able to work and function in our workplaces. But we don't have a lot of language to talk about that. And we get all defensive or uncomfortable. And so it's it's a competency in the United States and in other societies as well, but I'm really only steeped in life in the US and in particular regions too. Yeah.
Well, I guess I find myself wondering, you know, I personally know people who would respond to what we're talking about with, it sounds like a personal problem.
Mm.
Like, why am I supposed to make sure that I change my behavior to accommodate your feeling of safety?
Mm.
What do you say to that?
There are certainly individual choice points that we all have every day, and we can't make fully informed choices if we don't have some background of understanding. But we are talking about structural issues, and I know that people have a response to that. Like, that sounds jargony, that sounds elitist. The truth is that a lot of people come to adulthood without having an understanding that in our lifetime or relatively recently, before we were born, the laws were structured in such a way to devalue, oppress, value, privilege some of us over others. And it's not touchy-feely. That was the power of the structure and the power of the law. And we have a lot of work to do to undo that. And we've been tricked or fed a narrative that we've done the work in the United States to undo the harm of structural oppression. But Reconstruction was never completed, right? After the Civil War. I mean, the amount of information that people who come through our education system generally have not been privy to is uh, it's overwhelming. But so my work, or how I see what might be called DEI work, is to not be overwhelmed, to look at what are the things in our individual, group, organizational lives, and perhaps our civic engagement or political lives, where we are part of the solution. And that in itself can be the reward, because working um, in diverse solidarity has a lot of material rewards.
How much time does it generally take to go through a training of this kind to try to change your perspective and change the interactions?
Yeah, I could not give you a set amount of time, which may be frustrating, and also raises a point that's been controversial, where sometimes time or a hyper attention to time is attributed to white supremacy culture. So, were you going there? Because that's been like a soundbite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it, but and I hear what you're saying, because definitely, like, get it done yesterday is very much part of the normal way that things go in the culture. But I guess I was also getting to the arguments that how much time do you spend trying to train people to see other people's perspective, how much that takes away from the doing of the job that you're paid to do.
Right.
Like you have worked with the fire department.
Yeah.
Right. And I wonder if, especially in our current climate, if there wouldn't be people who would say, how much, like, your job is to fight the fire. How much time are you spending trying to teach these people how to be nice to each other so they can go fight a fire? What do they have to do with each other? What's those two things?
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
And that's a very legitimate criticism of what has come to be an industry of DEI. I've never identified what I do as DEI per se. I mean, I haven't fought the label, but I'm in the business or I'm in the science and the art of learning and unlearning. And nobody learns through a lecture, but maybe some people do. But, in general, what is effective in workplace learning is that it be applied to what you're doing, that it tap into your existing expertise, that it require you to draw on your own experiences. And if it's not doing that, you're not going to do anything, no matter what you're teaching.
What do you say to people who say that this kind of thing is like the problem with liberals? They're always telling other people how they have to be, how they have to interact.
Yeah.
How do you handle the question of, why can't I just be who I am, as long as I'm not causing any physical harm to somebody else?
Look, I can start with humility. I am someone who has learned, especially over these last few years, that being dogmatic does not help. Yeah, maybe it would be nice if it did about anything, any kind of change that we want people to do, but it doesn't. And what can I change? I can change myself. So I can be curious. I think there is some legitimate criticism to liberal people being judgmental. I mean, that's not up for debate. Like, we see it come out in public discourse all the time. I also think that we have to go back to history, and here is where I continually work on not coming across in a lectury way, but in really wanting to invite people into critical thinking. This word woke comes from a very important tradition, and I may not remember exactly all the years and the eras and the people, but it's not a term or an idea to take lightly. It is a term that comes out of civil rights, that is about Black Americans fighting for truth and rights, and it's really assaultive and minimizing to pretend, because it is pretending, because I do think that people know better, that this kind of hyper liberal don't let the bone go falls under this important word and movement, which is get woke.
Yeah. When your strategies and your learning sessions have all been effective, do you find that it's largely because you're preaching to the choir? I mean, how often how many times have you actually found out later on down the line that you really did, like, convert somebody who wasn't at least partially on your side or sharing your perspective to begin with.
Yeah, I'm not in the business of converting. Um, I think part of what we do
Fair enough.
and what's effective and what's joyful is coach and facilitate in partnerships and in pairs. So I have some really wonderful co-facilitators and model having honest conversations across difference ourselves. It is not a monolith. Um, and
Well, you take issue with the word converting, but I think that there are a lot of people who would see it that way if
yeah,
if they do not come to life with the perspective of I have to make sure that I am compassionate and empathetic to the experiences of everyone that I work with or
sure,
interact with, and
sure.
so if you're trying to convince them that's isn't there some measure of trying to convince them that that's a better way to be?
Yeah. I mean, I can play with that. I mean, my profession that I think has prepared me very well for this, and my background is drama therapy, and
Mhm.
having a theater background, and so we can lighten it up, a little bit, and we can play with that, like, you know, hear me out, and I want to hear what you have to say too. But really, the change does not happen in that kind of dialogue. The change happens in having the conditions met where our defenses are down enough to consider that maybe what I always thought was true and what I always thought was right is more nuanced. And that's not something that's limited to quote unquote diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we can all look back to what is a time in my life when um, maybe I did change my mind and maybe it was helpful for me. Like, what's in it for me? We all want that. I mean, that's another core principle to adult learning. There's got to be some benefit. And, of course, why are power structures so difficult to dismantle or change? Because, yeah, who wants to give up power or comfort? But there does come a point, and there are so many people in this world who have shared with us their story. There does come a point where the value and the gain of being in solidarity and not holding on to unearned power, um, the gain in being in real
I'm sorry, say that again. Not holding on to unearned power.
okay. The
Explain what that means
Yeah,
to
yeah.
the
So,
average person. Yeah.
not holding on to uh the opportunity to become um the ultimate head of an agency with having little lived experience or little professional experience in that agency,
Gotcha.
right? Or
Gotcha.
the
Okay.
power of making a mistake and not having that cost you your job, or seeing where that power and that privilege may have shown up in your life. That doesn't have to mean you're a bad person. It doesn't have to mean that you're not talented. It just means that there's a real gain to being side by side with people and appreciating merit and appreciating that sometimes it's my turn, sometimes it's your turn. There's enough for everyone. And that idea, of course, it's very counter to extractive capitalism, which is what's steeped in our way of operating. We don't have to use those words, but it translates into the way that we live every day. And it ultimately is about living with scarcity and fear. And it
Exactly.
does feel good to not live with scarcity and fear, but it's a big journey. Um,
Well,
because that means that some people do have to give up.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you mentioned that in the process of doing this work that the people involved in it have to um, you know, let their defenses down. that can be a really tall ask, especially in times where you feel like you've already been put upon by
Absolutely.
all the others getting more than you think they should have, or taking what you think should be yours. It's I guess I'm very much wrapped up in the whole mindset of being open to these learning experiences to begin with. It just seems like it's a tall order, especially on a large scale. I guess my question is there any level of validity to the argument of folks who are like, this is great that we're getting DEI stuff out of the government? Like, has something gone too far enough to justify the feeling of, we got to do something to pull this back?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
any kind of learning, or you know, eh, we're constantly toggling back and forth between poles, and then we get into depolarization also. I mean, eh, it's not my job to say, not that it's above my pay grade, but it's not my job to say, oh, we've gone too far. It's my job to say, this is so interesting. I am certainly not willing to compromise on my beliefs that every person has a right to feel safe enough to walk through life with you and your family and to have the opportunity to thrive. Um, Thriving is different than uh, the right to to threaten others. And I mean, no, we certainly have not gone too far in attempts to raise awareness that, without intent or not through individual fault, there are some of us in this world who can do and say things that are threatening to others by merit of our being, and that is not about being wishy-washy about other people's feelings. It's, we are interdependent. We are the products of an extremely imperfect society, and we're feeling it. And then, we can go right back to, I'm reading now A Basic Call to Consciousness, which is uh, a book of the statements to the World Indigenous Forum in the 1970s from World Indigenous leaders that trace back and tease out where we've gone wrong in terms of having a livable world, and a pathway to what we might need to do to um, keep what we've learned and what's valuable, and change or divest from what is killing our world.
How,
And that's the uh, sorry. I mean, you know how I get. So another
it's okay.
fantastic book is The Sum of Us by Heather Mickey. Fundamentally, what the conflict here is in our society is it a zero sum game where it's some can get ahead and it's a limited number, and so you've got to existentially
Some
try
people
to
would
stay
say yes.
ahead,
Yeah.
or
Hmm.
is it we are an interdependent world where what happens here impacts there, and we've got to figure it out how to do it without killing each other.
Right. Um, I would be remiss if I didn't talk to you about the training that you've done with some supervisors. I found it kind of fascinating that you talked about essentially teaching people in the workplace how to have power with their employees instead of power over them. Talk about that and why that matters.
Yeah. Well, again, a lot of my work is with departments and organizations where somehow people have been drawn to the work because they want to help others. Um, and so that can be a an easier starting point in these kinds of organizations. But our modern management approaches, they actually are rooted um, in systems of chattel slavery. There's also a fantastic, very rigorous historical book called Accounting for Slavery. Um, and we don't name that, but the idea of a supervisory hierarchy gets as much as you can out of the workers and so on. Um, and so the idea of power width is that a supervisor may be more of a coach who is invested in seeing someone perform well, enjoy their work, make an impact, continually improve, give feedback, give feed forward. Um, and then in the work that I often work with, it's particularly around supporting with the impact of being exposed to trauma and understanding the impact of secondary or vicarious trauma, and and preventing, managing burnout, and the mental load that comes with doing this kind of work. Um, so if we can think about it for all of us. Honestly, sometimes I do just want to be told what to do. I mean, we all sometimes just want to be told what to do, and that's great. Um, but for when our work is interpersonal,
Mm-hmm.
it's really important to have that kind of container with a supportive entity um, to process the work. And I know, like, that word process maybe it's a little airy fairy, but look, if you don't process it, it just pops up in other ways. It pops up
Yeah.
with your family. It pops up in your social media. It pops up in
Mm-hmm.
your own health and the kinds of things that we might do that are unhealthy or healthy. So we
Yeah.
are,
I think,
yeah, we're not
I mean,
machines, right? We're not machines, but we do need maintenance.
yeah, and it's interesting that you should say that because I was next going to go to the whole idea because as I'm listening to this conversation, and I know people who are right of center and who would definitely hear what we're talking about and say, all right, this is exactly why we don't need stuff like this in, say, the Pentagon. Like the whole, yeah, we're not machines, but to a certain extent, like the military, for instance, is probably more inclined to need to be machines. So would you say that there are places where this kind of work isn't necessarily appropriate
Yeah.
or
Well,
does it belong
yeah.
everywhere?
The military actually has a tradition of after action reviews, which
Mm-hmm.
is incredibly valuable, where you actually
Mm-hmm.
go through what worked, what didn't work in a mission. And that's something that I've learned from and borrowed. The military also has this phrase VUCA that has been adopted, really throughout many other sectors now, that stands for volatile something chaotic.
Figure it out.
I mean, basically, it stands for, everything's gone to shit and we can't predict anything.
Right, right, right.
And so, and what do we do? How do we lead? How do we manage? I mean, there is so much to learn from the military around leadership and influence. And at the same time, um, in the military, and then in the generations and generations of people who are impacted by service and by family members being in
Mhm.
service, there are a lot of quite deadly issues around organizational culture. So I don't think we ever have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is a terrible phrase. But you know, there's so much that we can benefit from by having interdisciplinary perspectives. And what is true is that if you're going to do any of this work that is about reconsidering how we've been doing the work, you have to really understand and respect the sector that you are working in. So I would never go in to work in the Pentagon without colleagues that have some street credibility in their service and in their roles.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
there's a lot of places that I would never go in unless I was invited. And a case in point is the fire department. And in that case, like we were invited, and they made a conscious decision. They said, we actually don't want to do what we've always been doing, which is sort of, these particular industry specific approaches. We want to mix this up with you. So, again, it can go back to like, how do people learn, period? You've got to have some credibility, some trust, and a real deep understanding of the culture.
So to people who have always felt like work like this and diversity issues and equity is about, people of color, what would you say?
Diversity, of course, is about so many different things. I really learned from the work of Loretta Ross, who has the concept of calling in as opposed to calling out. She is a radical feminist Black woman with a very inclusive framework. And so what I would also I happen to,
I guess let me ask it this way. How does all of this help, the dominant culture? Like, what is, you mentioned before the whole idea of having the sense that there's something in it for them. Can you put a fine point on what's in it for them?
Sure, absolutely. I'll talk about my own experience. I'll also say I happen to focus on race because there are many aspects of diversity that are extremely important and need attention. I am of the school that one of our fundamental wounds is around race. And so by focusing on race, we make room and advance our skills and understanding in having a diverse and representative workplace. So I grew up in Northern Virginia. If you saw the movie Remember the Titans, it's based on the high school that I went to. So I started in school just a few years after forcible desegregation in Alexandria, Virginia. And race and categorization was all around me. Why was I one of 7 kids who were pulled out of class, 7 white kids, to go to the quote unquote gifted and talented class, which I now like to call the gin and tonic class. These were compromises that were made, and I was uncomfortable. And I'm not saying like, I was such a prescient kid that I was anti-racist before it was even a thing. It just was so obvious, like that people were being categorized and tracked, and some classes were like all Black kids, and some were, and we all sat separate in the cafeteria, which that's also a human thing. And I'm not necessarily even saying that's bad. I mean, there's a very important book called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? But it's just the dynamic is all around, and we didn't have language to talk about it. And there would be racial tension, and there were, times that I got beat up, or there were times that I tried to say something and it came out wrong. And so trying to get back to the like what's in it for me. I mean, one of the first things that's in it for me, for us, is to know that we're not crazy. Like there is something going on, and there's a reason for it, and you're not bad. That's the biggest thing. I grew up with a lot of white guilt, and it was not helpful, and it was ridiculous. And this is not about making white kids feel bad about themselves. It is possible to have a positive white racial identity. There's so much that we've lost in the racialization of our peoples. I mean, we've certainly talked about this with Judaism, relating to anti-Semitism and racism. I and some members of my family lost Jewish ethnic tradition that got watered down to fit in. I used to take it as a compliment when I was told, "Oh, you don't look Jewish." And I didn't realize until like way later, just how much we all have been affected by needing to meld ourselves into this racial categorization game.
Yeah.
And so it's just funner. It's just funner to be in life where we can talk about it, laugh about it, see like why we're not living next to neighbors who are, we say we like diversity, but our neighborhoods might not be so diverse. That's not just because people want to live separately.
Yeah.
They're, I think when a lot of people find out about the laws and the incentives and disincentives that have
Yeah.
happened, it's um it's hard not to be impacted. In fact, in my social policy class that I taught with undergraduates last semester, I had a real mixed group. A lot of young men from all over the country who were athletes. And so that included actually some white young men from the Midwest who had never been exposed to like Heather McGhee's book, The Sum of Us. And I got two comments at the end that I've never had to think about this. And you really opened my mind. And I'm so glad that I know this.
Yeah. But they
You
sought
would
out
say
your
that?
class. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
what's in. They're going to play better because they've also talked about like, some tensions on their teams.
On the teams.
They're
Yeah.
going to
Yeah,
relate
that makes
better.
sense.
They're going to play better. They're going to raise their children better. They're going to have a consciousness that does not have to be a weight, but that allows them to be more informed about the choices that they make.
Fantastically put. Absolutely. Elizabeth Speck, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tanya D. Davis. It is always great to talk with you and learn with you.
Thank you for joining us. For more on Mind Open learning strategies, go to mindopenlearning.com and visit us at theqc.net and subscribe for exclusive clips and timely columns. Until next time.